Preface. Horror has always been a fascination of mine, and it's a joy to share that with my son. This collection of stories is a testament to our mutual love of the genre. So turn off the lights, grab a blanket, and prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown.
Chapter 1. Fading Light. Jack Carson wasn't the type to be rattled easily. At 22, he lived a laid-back life in Maplewood, a town that thrived on routine and familiarity. He had grown up here, knew every winding street, every face at the local diner, and every secret trail that cut through the surrounding woods. Jack spent most of his days working at the small gas station on the edge of town, dreaming of bigger things but never quite finding the motivation to leave. Jack's circle of friends was small but close. Mark, the oldest of the group at 24, had a sharp wit and an even sharper temper, but there was no one more loyal. He worked as a mechanic, his hands always stained with oil and grease, and had a knack for fixing just about anything. Ethan, on the other hand, was the dreamer. Slightly younger than Jack, he still lived with his parents and worked odd jobs around town. He was the kind of guy who always had his head in the clouds, eyes lit up with the promise of adventures that never quite came to be. Then there was Lily, Jack's girlfriend. She was everything Jack wasn't: ambitious, driven, and endlessly curious about the world beyond Maplewood. She had big plans, always talking about the day she'd finally leave this small town behind, dragging Jack along with her. Her laughter was contagious, and when she was around, Jack felt like maybe there was more to life than what he'd always known. They'd been together for 3 years now. Their bond, one of those rare and steady things in a town that often felt stuck in time. It was during one of their usual Friday night gatherings that Jack first noticed something had changed in the air. They were sitting at their favorite spot, an old picnic table by the river, the autumn breeze carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant rain. Mark was ranting about some stubborn car he'd had to fix. Ethan was daydreaming aloud about his next big idea, and Lily was playfully nudging Jack, teasing him about his lack of ambition. "Jack, when are you going to do something exciting for once?" she laughed, her eyes sparkling in the fading light. "You're too young to be this boring." Jack smirked, rolling his eyes. "Maybe I'm saving all my excitement for one big moment." "Sure," Lily teased, "if that moment ever decides to show up." It was then that the conversation shifted, like a chill slipping into the air. Mark glanced around, lowering his voice. "Did you guys hear about Henry Caldwell?" Jack shook his head. "The farmer?" "Yeah," Mark replied, leaning in. "Went missing about a week ago. They found his boot near the woods, but that's it. Nothing else." Jack felt a shiver creep down his spine. Maybe he just wandered off. "That's what everyone thought," Mark continued. "But then Mrs. Benson disappeared too, and a couple of kids said they saw something big, moving in the woods the other night." Lily frowned. "You think it's just some animal?" "Maybe," Mark said, but his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. "But whatever it is, it's not acting like any animal I've heard of." Ethan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "My dad's friend works with the sheriff. He told him about the footprints." "What footprints?" Jack asked. "Big ones," Ethan replied, eyes wide. "Real big. They go deep into the woods and just stop, like whatever made them vanished into thin air." A silence fell over the group, the wind rustling the leaves overhead. Jack tried to brush off the uneasy feeling creeping into his chest, but the way Lily's hand tightened around his told him she felt it too. As they packed up to leave, Jack couldn't shake the thought of those footprints. It was just a story, he told himself. just another tall tale to keep things interesting in an otherwise dull town. But as he walked Lily home that night, past the darkened houses and the flickering streetlights, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. For the first time in a long time, Maplewood didn't feel like home. It felt like something was watching, waiting. Chapter 2. Into the Woods. 2 weeks had passed since that strange night by the river, and life in Maplewood continued, as it always did, except for one thing. Lily hadn't returned Jack's calls in over a day. At first, he thought it was just her being busy. She had a habit of throwing herself into her work whenever she was feeling restless. But when he stopped by her house that evening, her father answered the door, his face drawn and tired. "Lily didn't come home last night," Mr. Warren said, his voice barely more than a whisper. He was a tough man, a police officer who had seen his fair share of trouble in Maplewood. But now he looked like someone who had been gutted from the inside, his eyes hollow. "She went out for a run and never came back." Jack felt his blood turn to ice. "Are you sure she didn't just—" "She's not the type to just vanish," Mr. Warren snapped, but his anger quickly melted into something more fragile. "We've got a search team combing the woods now, but there's been no sign of her." The world around Jack blurred, his heart pounding so loudly that he could barely hear anything else. Without thinking, he bolted to Mark's house, where Ethan was already waiting. They could see the panic in Jack's eyes even before he spoke. "She's gone," Jack said, breathless. "Lily's missing." Ethan stood there, his usual dreamy expression replaced with something sharp and real. "Are you sure? Maybe she—" "No," Jack cut him off. "Her dad already has the police searching. We have to do something." Mark ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "And do what exactly? The police are already out there." "I don't care," Jack shouted. "We have to help her. We know those woods better than anyone." Ethan glanced at Mark, and they both knew there was no arguing with Jack when he got like this. "Fine," Mark muttered. "We'll go. But we stick together, all right? None of that hero stuff." The three of them gathered whatever they could. Flashlights, old camping gear, and a couple of walkie-talkies Mark had swiped from his dad's garage. As they entered the forest, the trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out as if to snatch them up. The search was already underway, with small groups of officers combing through the brush, their flashlights flickering in the dim light. They moved deeper, avoiding the search parties to explore parts of the woods that no one else would think to check. Every step felt like an eternity, the silence around them amplifying the crack of twigs and the rustling of leaves. Then they found it. Caught on a thorny bush, just off the main path, was a strip of pale fabric. Jack's heart clenched as he recognized it. It was a torn piece of Lily's favorite running shirt. He reached out with trembling fingers, pulling it free. "It's hers," he said, voice thick with emotion. "She was here." Mark's jaw tightened. But where did she go? Ethan's flashlight caught something on the ground and he crouched down, squinting. "What is that?" he muttered. Beneath the leaves was a small metallic object, half buried in the dirt. He dug it out carefully, revealing what looked like an old, rusted pendant, covered in strange, intricate carvings. "This doesn't belong to Lily," he said, turning it over in his hand. "It's weird." "What's weird?" Jack asked. Ethan held up the pendant to the light, revealing a symbol carved into its center, a crescent moon entwined with sharp, jagged lines, almost like claw marks. "I've never seen anything like this before," Ethan murmured. "It feels wrong." Jack could feel the hairs on his arm stand up, but before he could respond, Mark called out, "Guys, over here!" They stumbled over to where Mark stood, his flashlight pointing toward the base of a massive tree. Carved deep into the bark were long, claw-like gashes, fresh and oozing with sap. The marks were at least 7 feet off the ground, as if whatever had made them stood impossibly tall. Mark stepped back, his face pale. "No animal did this," he whispered. Jack felt his throat tighten, his pulse quickening. What could have done that? "I don't know," Mark said, "but we need to get out of here." Before they could react, a blood-curdling howl pierced the silence. It was distant but unmistakable, low, guttural, and echoing through the woods like something from a nightmare. Every hair on Jack's body stood on end, and he felt his blood run cold. "What the hell was that?" Ethan gasped, clutching the pendant like a lifeline. "We need to move," Jack said, urgency in his voice. "Now!" But as they turned to leave, Jack's flashlight flickered, and for just a moment he saw something in the darkness, 2 glowing eyes staring back at them from the shadows. His heart skipped a beat, and he blinked, but whatever it was had vanished. "Jack!" Mark yelled, snapping him out of his daze. "Come on!" They stumbled back through the underbrush, hearts pounding, until they finally reached the edge of the woods. The search parties hadn't noticed them, too focused on their own frantic search for Lily. But as they stood there, catching their breath, Jack looked back into the darkness, his mind racing. He could still see those eyes glowing like embers, burning into his memory. Something was out there, and it wasn't just an animal. Something old, something hungry.